Evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, Tuesday, 10th of September. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson. I chair this meeting, and I just want to explain to everyone that in the event of any emergency, and I'm not aware that one is planned, there are exits, staircase at the front of the building and one at the rear. Please head forthwith out those staircases should you hear the alarm, and congregate in St Rumwold Street so that we can check everybody is out safely. Meeting's being held in the Grand Jury Room this evening in the Town Hall, and the meeting as usual is being broadcast live on YouTube, where you will be able to watch it ad infinitum to your heart's content. Members of the committee are reminded that they can use electronic devices, as can any members of the public, but you're requested to please switch all your devices to silent mode and to avoid interfering with the meeting either through any noise or flash during the course of the meeting. Thank you very much. There are toilets on every floor in the building, and I will just say that if the meeting is looking like it's going to go on much past 7:30, we will have a short break at that time, and then reconvene afterwards. So I'll just ask people to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Block on my left.
Good evening, Richard Block, Chief Operating Officer.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tittery Ward.
Good evening, William Summocks, Councillor for Royal North Ward.
Sam McLean, Councillor for Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Good evening, Sam McCarthy representing Shrub End Ward and substituting for Councillor Smith.
Good evening, Councillor Sean Kelly representing Wivenhoe.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. And as Councillor McCarthy has just indicated, he's here substituting for Councillor Paul Smith this evening. So that's item 2 dealt with. Item 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any. No, thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declaration of interest before we start this evening? I'm not seeing any, so we'll take that as no. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on 30th of July, and Mr. Evans just wants to raise something with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I was notified today of 2 small amendments to the proposed draft minutes. So if I could ask the committee to look at the first section, which deals with the procurement update. One of the changes highlights the fact that the council will provide local suppliers where possible, and the second change is that the council used an external company to assist it in delivering social value since 2020 and not 2022 as published. So if those changes are accepted, those are the changes I propose. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So subject to those 2 minor amendments to the minutes as we've seen them before this evening, everyone who was in attendance happy with those? Councillor Kelly, I think you wanted to raise something before we agree. Go on.
It was just a small point. We agreed, I think, as a group around some changes to the proposed. There was a table of proposed changes that we might want to implement for compliance purposes, and I think we agreed as a group that it would be good to see the sort of effort required to implement those things. I don't see that noted in the minutes with any degree of detail, and I think it's quite important that that was in there because I think we all agreed it uniformly.
Okay, thank you. I recollect that as well, and you're quite right, because we were concerned about whether the benefits outweighed the costs or vice versa. So, Mr. Evans, if we could just incorporate that as well, please, subject to everyone being in agreement. Again, I'll ask for those who are in attendance whether or not you agree with that. Yep, thank you very much. Okay, that moves us on then to item 6, have your say, and as far as I'm aware, we've had none this evening. So that takes us on to item 7.1, review and assurance of Colchester Borough Homes performance for Q1 24-25. So if I can just invite our CBH colleagues to join us around the table, please. So we have before us a detailed series and set of documentation, which I'm trusting everyone has read through. And we have a number of members of CBH staff and board with us this evening. So I'm just going to pass over to them to introduce themselves and take it from there, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good evening. If I could just introduce myself, and then I'm Philip Sullivan, Chief Executive of Colchester Borough Homes.
Good evening, Esme Cole, Chair of Colchester Borough Homes.
And Chris Wade, Director of Assets for Colchester Borough Homes.
Did we need to squeeze anyone else around? Is Jeff joining us, or is he heckling from the back? Okay. Right. Over to you then, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you.
Thank you. If myself and Esme can briefly introduce the report. This is the second regulatory assurance report following the introduction of proactive regulation that started in April of this year. And just to highlight, if I may, Chair, that this is in the context of the new regulatory regime. The committee is providing oversight as the landlord of the City Council's homes. If I can pass over to Esme, who's going to start with the mock inspection update, Chair.
Thank you. We had a really informative and positive process for CBH through this. We used Savills, who are probably the market sort of leader, most respected for this kind of process. And actually our team consisted of 2 ex-regulators. So the process that we followed pretty much followed what would have happened with the actual regulator. So it gave us a really good grounding in what we could expect. The outcome that we've received from Savills was very positive. We were graded a C2. You're seeing the pack that we've given you, sort of a high C2 with a borderline C1. And a lot of the feedback that we have been given was continuous improvement rather than any material changes that we would need to make to any processes. The findings have been shared and you've seen the report. We are creating an action plan which will be shared with this committee in November. And you have the report, and so I suppose there are the 6 findings that Savills have illustrated to us where we can focus upon, and I will open it up to questions from the committee about those or any extra detail that you'd like.
Thank you. Councillors, any comments at this stage or questions? Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is quite at the right stage, but just to pick up on some of the detail, if we go up a bit, percentage reports under paragraph, let me get the right paragraph, 5.4.1, the tenant satisfaction measures. Now, I appreciate these are somewhat subjective, that if a tenant puts in a complaint and they don't get the result, they're probably going to say it hasn't been handled correctly, inevitable. But just a couple of things. Firstly, the figure on satisfaction with communal areas is 61%. Doesn't, you know, that seems a little bit on the low side, even if you assume that some people will never be satisfied. And the satisfaction that the landlord listens to views and acts on them, 53.2%, that actually seems quite low compared to the next one, the satisfaction that the landlord keeps tenants informed. It seems strange that, you know, they seem to be quite happy with one. not very happy with the others. So I just wondered what sort of actual questions are being asked there, or why we think that's come out with a little bit of difference between them. Just a bit of background information, really.
Thank you. Philip, are you going to answer that?
Thank you, yes. I mean, thank you, Councillor Dundas. These were literally the questions that were asked, and it is a perception in terms of complaints. The first one is perception rather than a transactional survey. So it may be that those individuals haven't actually made a complaint. In terms of the other metrics, listening to and acting on views. So clearly that's very important. It's certainly an area that I would want to see improve. Key is getting underneath that and understanding what more we can be doing, and that's where follow-up engagement with customers will support us in understanding that. Similarly, in terms of communal repairs or communal areas, some of that may be within the building, some of it may be external, some of it may not even be council-owned land. So, for example, some of it may be highways or Essex County Council. So honing in so that we can make sure that our specific services improve and that we can liaise with other partners as well.
All right. I mean, I think the most important thing for us to see here in this committee is that those ratings are on an upward trajectory as we come back, aren't they? Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, this is an issue on which I'm not at all clear in my mind. I think we're all struggling with it. Are we the shareholder or are we the landlord? And are we looking at the right things in the committee? And normally I'm sitting here saying we need more detail. In this case, I'm wondering whether we're not looking at too much detail. I'm trying to think. It says in the agenda that we're here as the shareholder committee, and I think or Esme has made it clear that we're actually here as the landlord. So we're looking at it as the landlord. So as the landlord, am I interested in the internal, the Savills report and so on? Or am I interested in the service we get? I'm certainly interested in the tenant satisfaction. Certainly that goes there. I'm interested in how much it's costing and what the level of service is that we're doing. I don't think I'm interested. As a landlord, I'm very confused about these different roles. And then as the shareholder, we should again be looking at it with a slightly different angle. So I think we need to sort that out. And I would think that a lot of this stuff here that we've been given should be sorted out by the CBH board. Your suggestion from earlier, but the CBH board should be scrutinising and checking that Savills, they're getting through all their regulatory approvals. That's their responsibility. I think this is too much for the Audit and Governance Committee, and that we should be concentrating. There's still nothing about the costs and the total costs, the total 12 million on management that we're spending, and whether there's duplication between CBH and what's happening within the HRA. That's a year now I've been asking that question, and I really hope we'll get an answer on it. I'm waiting. So we should hear a bit more about that and a little less about the regulatory stuff, in confidence that the CBH board is looking at it.
Thank you. And I think before I bring you in to answer that, I would just say that is Councillor Sunnock's view. I'm not sure that it's the view of the entirety of the committee, Councillor Sunnock's. But I take your point. I do think that perhaps as we go forward, and I recognise that this is a relatively new regulatory framework. We're all still getting to grips with how it operates. We're also doing a lot more oversight of CBH than we have done previously, which is a good thing. But I think one of the points that you make I would concur with, and that is perhaps we need to be seeing at this meeting, when we're looking at this particular area, how CBH is performing against the regulatory framework, what the board have actually picked up as being the salient points for us to give consideration to. I don't have any difficulty with seeing some of the detail, because I think the detail actually helps me to understand a bit more of what's going on, but I appreciate that some members may feel that it's a bit of overkill. So, as I've said previously about things that come to us, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have documentation that comes with links to some of the detail, so that those of us who want to delve into more of the depth can do so, and those who just want to skim over the top and see what the CBH board have picked up as being areas that they need us to be aware of, we can deal with that fairly readily. I'll come back to you then, Mr. Sullivan, just to respond to Councillor Sunnock's.
Thank you, Chair. In the context of this report, the committee is acting as the landlord for the council's social housing. So the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023 introduced new proactive consumer regulation. The regulator of social housing requires social landlords to adhere to the new standards. There are 4 new consumer standards. And they will want to see evidence and assurance that this council has that you are adhering to those standards. This is a new mechanism to provide you as the council with that assurance at this committee in anticipation of what will be an inspection that takes place of the council. And it is a requirement of the council as the landlord to adhere to those standards. You achieve that through the work of CBH, but the regulator will look at the landlord, and that is the council. So the assurance will come up through CBH. And just specifically in terms of the level of detail, I agree, and this is work in progress, so please bear with us to an extent. So you will have seen this refined. This is the second report. There's a new section 511 in the report, which is additional assurance coming up through CPH. I would see that growing, that section, and other sections shrinking potentially. So you don't see as much detail. I completely agree with the chair. There could be some more links in there as well that you could have that further information if you wanted to delve into it. But I would see certain aspects growing, but in a succinct way, meaning that you won't necessarily need to see as much detail going forward. And finally, Councillor Sunnock, I completely understand, and you have asked before about the costs. You'll see in the report in section 4.6 that this is focused on assurance to the council in a regulatory capacity for you as the landlord of the council's housing. It doesn't take away additional reporting requirements of CPH and your role as shareholder of CPH. This is different though. And you'll see that next month there is the annual governance statement, and that will include finances of CPH coming to this committee, Chair.
Thank you. And yeah, I was just going to remind us all that that the information around finances will come to our next meeting. Councillor Sunnock?
Sorry, when we get to that next meeting and we look at the costs, we'll be told that we're looking at it as shareholders and that the costs are something we bear as landlords. So we'll be scoped out then again from clearing the costs. So the question is, sometime, somewhere, can we address the fact that our total management costs going through the HRA are about 12 million a year, of which slightly less than half is CBH, and the rest is cost incurred within somewhere else in the council. And we don't have any real breakdown of that or explanation of whether there's duplication, and they don't reconcile through to the costs we've declared in our benchmarking. So we're actually incurring about £2,000 a house of management costs, and the amount we've declared in our benchmarking, I think, is about £1,300 a house. So we need to get to the bottom of that. And I don't think probably the shareholder committee actually is the right time. I think it is when we're sitting here as landlords that we'll need to do it. So sometime, can we get to that, please?
And I think I'll just come in at this point, if I may, because obviously there is the Housing Revenue Account review that's ongoing but coming towards the end of its time, is my understanding. So no doubt that will go forward to the scrutiny panel, and then we will see the fruits of their labours coming here later on. is my understanding. But I'll pass back to Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. There is more information on the HRO review coming to the October scrutiny panel. That won't be the outcome of the review. It will more be aimed at an update in terms of where we are and the future milestones, so that scrutiny can know at what stage the next stages of their input into that can take place. But there will be an update provided at the October scrutiny. And from my perspective, you know, we're completely transparent. You know, our accounts are public documents. We'll talk about them at the next one of these meetings as you see fit. But you know, we're absolutely transparent in terms of our costs, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to come back from the finances then to the information that's in front of us. And I know I stopped to allow Councillor Dundas to ask a question from the presentation that we'd had initially. Before I take any other comments and questions, do you want to carry on with what you're intending to tell us, Philip, and then we'll come back to questions and comments, I think is the way to proceed from here, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I will try and keep this fairly brief. I was going to highlight the TSM measures which Councillor Dundas has picked up on. They're the first set of benchmarking that we've had through, and it includes 221 landlords, including 62 local authorities. Positive is that we are above the median on overall satisfaction. There are some mixed metrics underneath there, but I have tried to show the ones that are significantly better and the ones that are less good than the median. You'll see in 5.44 that action to address emergency repair response times has already been taken, and just to update committee that as at the end of August, year-to-date performance this year is at 94.7%. That is better than last year's median for local authorities. So we're seeing the fruits of those improvements that we have been making. An action plan arising from the survey is being considered at CBH's Operations Committee, and the 24-25 survey is currently taking place, Chair. And then if I can just highlight 5.6, that the Ombudsman's annual report, this is new annual reports, draft has been received, we've checked it for accuracy. As indicated in 5.62 of the report, it advises that the national maladministration rate last year was 73% and 78% for local authorities and ALMOs. This compares to 67% for Colchester. I would say though, with increased customer awareness, ongoing media campaigns by the Ombudsman, which we support, you know, we have promoted the Ombudsman, but we are very much expecting at CBH the volume of cases referred to and investigated by the Ombudsman to increase in the coming months. And then in terms of regulatory assurance work plan, before I hand back to Esme in terms of the additional CBH assurance, Appendix 4 outlines a work plan for the assurance reports that will come through to committee. This will help ensure we cover the necessary breadth of regulatory updates of relevance, but it will evolve over time. It just gives an indication at this stage, Chair, as to what this committee can expect to see, but I can also assure you that it will refine in response to this committee's feedback. If I can hand back to Esme now, please, Chair, in respect of the additional assurance committee.
Chair. So in line with the Savills feedback and ensuring as your role of landlord, I just wanted to bring the assurance from the board that we've been covered in the last board meeting. We scrutinised, from the tenant scrutiny panels, we received updates on the progress of the responsive repairs and the social media scrutiny, and 4 actions from responsive repairs and 5 from social media have either been implemented or are currently in progress. We also received the outcomes from the lettings scrutiny investigation, and we will be tracking the progress of that. We looked at the complaint system, so we looked at the self-assessment against the Ombudsman complaint handling code, and as a board we've approved the approach. And we also looked at the annual complaint handling code. We were assured that all of the correct reports and the correct detail were going to our Ops and Performance Committee. and that also sets out the complaints and ombudsman findings and any service improvements and outcomes. And that was one of the things raised from Savills, that we need to focus on outcomes and not just the procedure. Board were assured that the 23-24 TSM results have been submitted correctly, and we also did a deep dive into the 6 big health and safety areas and sought assurance over a range of issues in those. And as we do regularly, the board reviewed the strategic risk map with a particular focus to breaching regulation, given the standards, and we were assured that all suitable mitigations are in place and being implemented. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. I had an indication from several councillors before I cut them off in their prime, so I'll go back. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you for the report. I just wanted to pick up actually on page, I think it's page 47, when we talk about the EPC ratings of the housing stock, which we have, well, a very good percentage actually are rated C or above. We have 820, although possibly less than that, because I think there's 38 which haven't been included in that, which are D, E or F. We've got 763D, 56E and 1F. The only thing is, anybody who's ever read EPCs or rented or bought a house, you read them, and the jump sometimes to get to the next level, it varies enormously in that sometimes it can be change some light bulbs, put some loft insulation in, and you jump up significantly. On other occasions, it's £50,000 worth of work, and actually sometimes not even economically viable to do it. So I'm not holding you to an exact figure on this, but out of those 800-ish, how many do we think are really practically not very viable to bring up to C rating? And at what point do we perhaps actually look at potential disposal around those properties, in the sense that they're not economically viable for us to continue with, and we'd do better to sell them and buy something else?
Thank you. I'm confident that we're okay in terms of getting up to EPC C or above by 2030. That's something we factored in, and actually, from a cost perspective, we've broken the back of it through the work we've been doing, and the City Council has invested over many years. We are in a much better position than many, I would say. So I'm confident on that by 2030. The bigger challenge, in fact, the very significant challenge, is the net zero by 2050. That's a very different position, I would say. We're not alone in that, but that at the moment is a very challenging target from a financial perspective and from a technology perspective, but from a financial perspective. Sorry, there was one other. And then in terms of disposals, Councillor Dundas, this is something that's been looked at as part of the HRO review because of consideration for any properties that have a negative net present value, but it's linking that back to the asset management strategy as well. It's a sort of a fairly broad piece of work that we're looking to do as part of the HRO review. So you should expect to see something on disposals coming out of that, but it will be a strategic approach based on the information that we gather.
Happy with that? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't until that last remark, and then I was happy with the response. Okay. Councillor Kelly, I have you next.
So this is a broader question in terms of the way that you're displaying some of the feedback. I hope I haven't jumped ahead too far. I know that Councillor Dundas has gone forward to a page you had a little way, so this isn't quite as far forward, but there's a number of graphs where you've got, you're demonstrating performance over time, and there's a target level, and this might predate my time here, so forgive me if this has already been covered somewhere else, where the target was 95%, and then it's dropped to 90%. So it's effectively, you're meeting targets by lowering the target, is what it appears to me at least. So what was the justification for the lowering of that target from 95 to 90%? And then just on that, there's an apparent sudden decline in the level of reporting of complaints or whatever, or whatever it happened to have been. was there an outage or something? Or was there some sort of issue with the way that you were collecting information from tenants that resulted in this fairly sudden drop-off? Or was it just the way that the data is reported and it's sort of collected and then it backfills?
Can I, just before you respond, Councillor Kelly, could I just ask, when you're referring to parts in the report, could you just give us the paragraph or the page number to help everybody follow, and that way we know that the answer that you're getting or the response that you're getting links to the right thing. Thank you. Yeah.
So the target drop-offs that are noted specifically are on page 40, and in fact that also has at the bottom of that page has the reports logged completed, has a very dramatic drop, as does non-emergency logged and emergency logged. They're all on page 40, in fact.
Thank you very much. Philip?
Thank you. So in terms of the target dropping, two things. I think that's in the context of our performance last year and making it a challenging target, but one that's realistic. What I would say is that, as I sort of mentioned, the trajectory on our repairs completed on time is a positive one because of the steps we've taken. But that's the rationale for why the target was dropped this year compared to the previous year. Challenging, but realistic. Sorry, in terms of the other comment, Councillor, regarding declining reporting of complaints, would you mind pointing me in the direction of that page?
It's at the bottom of page 40. You've got, I think it's page 40. There are a couple of line graphs with just blue and purple on them.
Yes, sorry, my understanding, yeah, so there's two things. If it's complaints on page 41, Chair, that's just the number of complaints we've received in those quarters. But it's also relative to the size of us as a landlord. I'd probably need to be 100% sure to give you an accurate response in terms of which graph we're looking at. Is that something that we could consider outside of the meeting?
I was going to say, I'm happy if you want to just raise that with Mr. Sullivan after the meeting. I'm sure if you sent him an email just pointing him in the right direction, he would happily provide you with detailed response. And if you could just circulate that to the other members of the committee, I would be grateful. Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Kelly? Thank you. I had Councillor McLean. Did I see your hand up? No. Councillor Sunnox.
Sorry. Yeah, yes, I'm in danger of becoming really boring on this, but I think I've been told that we're not going to get that cost reconciliation, that we're not going to look at it. It's going to be somewhere in the HRA review, or maybe it'll somewhere in the scrutiny panel. And we've got a work programme that doesn't include it. I feel, as the Governance and Audit Committee, that's a reasonable question, and that we should get an answer to it. And if we don't get an answer to it, it brings a question mark over all the benchmarking material we're seeing. So we've got a big difference between what we're reporting through the accounts and what we're seeing through the benchmarking. I'm asking for a reconciliation between the two. It doesn't need an HRA review to do it. It shouldn't need a scrutiny panel to do it. It should be a reasonable question. It might not be able to be answered now, but I think it would be really nice if we could have an answer to it.
Okay, well, I think if I ask Mr. Sullivan to go back and following the presentation to the scrutiny panel on the HRA review, if there is any way that you can incorporate that into the piece that's going to come to the next G&A committee meeting, that might help us out. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments from around the table? I'm not seeing any. I've got just a couple. One was on page 31 where it talks about the the importance of CBH being a learning organisation and how the inspectors are used to assess complex repairs where it doesn't quite go right. It says, if the work cannot be completed immediately, the inspector assigns the task to a designated contractor, etc. And my request would be at that point, as a local ward councillor, where from time to time I do get residents who, where something hasn't been dealt with as expeditiously as they would like by CBH, and a complaint has been escalated, they come to the local ward councillor saying, can you help? And I would just ask, if things get to that stage, if you couldn't just have a system that informs the local ward councillor that that's in fact happening. I don't know how difficult it would be, how straightforward it is to do, but it's just something I'd like you to take away, please. And the other thing that I wanted to raise was just above that on in 5.53, towards the end, it talks about us being in the top quartile for void times, but nevertheless we're still at over 31 days to turn around a property. And given what we know to be the issue around the city with homelessness, I just wonder where we're at in terms of reducing that 31 days.
Yeah, so we are working all the time hard on because we scrutinise ourselves on this all the time. I think what we're trying to introduce is some pre-termination inspections, so we know what's coming. We can do things before the people, the residents leave, and also ensure that we know what's going to happen before we give the order to the contractor, so we can get into that position where the works order's there and ready. So they're the two sort of key areas, and making sure that the resident is also aware of their duties to clear the property, which and make sure that they don't leave anything that we have to tidy up and might take really long to sort out as well. So they're the two kind of key areas that we're working on at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So we're now much more au fait with the general standards that are expected of CBH as the representative of the landlord. So the standards being safety and quality, neighbourhood and community, tenancy and transparency, influence and accountability, which is good. And we've been asked this evening to note the positive outcomes. I think also, you know, those that aren't quite as positive as we'd like them to be, but nevertheless the outcomes and the recommendations arising from the mock inspection completed by Savills. I know I asked questions about what Savills' abilities were, and I was pleasantly reminded that they have a very good reputation for doing this sort of work, so we should accept their report as being of a reasonable, or if not a high standard. And to agree to receive the action plan arising from the review at the 19th of November meeting. 2.2 is to make any comments or recommendations to the portfolio holder for housing in respect of Q1 performance, and subject to this, to note the performance update contained in the report in Appendix 1. I don't think we've made any recommendations to the portfolio holder. Are there any that anybody wishes to make before we move on? Not seeing any, so we'll move off. 2.3 is subject to any comments. Note the Housing Ombudsman 23-24 Colchester Performance Report and the case detailed at Appendix 2, which we've done. Consider the deep dive on stock quality provided in the report and Appendix 3. And make any comments or recommendations to the portfolio holder and CBH. I think we've made some comments and suggestions, and agree to receive reports that incorporate updates as set out in the work plan provided at Appendix 4. And finally, to note the remaining updates provided in this report, which I think we've done. members. With a couple of requests for further information at the next meeting. All right. Thank you very much to the three of you for your contributions this evening. And no doubt Councillor Kelly will be in touch just to remind you of his, the detail of his query. Thank you. Right, that takes us on to 8.1, yeah, which is verbal update from our Section 151 officer, Mr. Smalls. I see you're joined by the portfolio holder for resources this evening, Councillor Corey. And I think it would also be helpful if I just introduced again to members Emma Larkham from KPMG and invite you just to join us as well, so you're at the table with us, Emma. Thank you. Andrew, I'm going to pass on to you for your verbal update, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to members. I think I'm going to keep this short, in as much as I did circulate to members of the committee an update report the week before last, I think it was, setting out pretty much what the national position is. Summarising it, really, I suppose, is the government's committed to introducing a backstop date. It's now been pushed back slightly to the 13th of December 2024, by which all outstanding opinions or disclaimed opinions have to be given by. So that's on all outstanding audits up to the end of 22-23. And then they've also introduced a set of new backstop dates for the next 4 or 5 years thereafter, by which should gradually bring the production of accounts back up to date, back to the new statutory deadline of July into September.
It will be, yeah, so it's 23-24 will be a February date, 25-26 is a end of February date.
Can I? Sorry, Emma.
Sorry,
can I just ask you to push the mic across, because otherwise people listening in won't be able to hear.
No, of course. Thank you. So yes, the next 2 years, so 23-24, 24-25 are end of February backstop dates, then moving into a January backstop date, eventually moving back to a end of November date. So a gradual rebuilding of assurance process.
Thank you for that. There's a gradual process to bring the accounts production back into its regular or regularised time frame, but it's many years, I suppose, is the key point. But, as we've discussed at previous meetings, something has to be done. Not ideal. I don't think there's not an awful lot of love for the process, really, but something needs to be done to bring it back into normalise the process. That's the substance of it. There will be delays and there will be disclaimed opinions probably for years to come across local government as a whole, and that is pretty much unavoidable at this point, I would say. Finally, I was asked to speak to BDO for an update, and I spoke with BDO yesterday, the outgoing auditors, with Chris Hartgrove, just to get an updated position from them in terms of their plans. They still intend to produce an audit opinion for 2021. They're close to that at the moment, and they will do that ahead of the backstop date, but they say it's not possible to produce an opinion other than a disclaimed opinion for 21, 22 and 22, 23 by the new backstop date of 13th of December. I asked whether we were an outlier at Colchester amongst their clients, and they said absolutely not. We're pretty much in the pack, in the same position as all of their other clients at this point in time. I was asked to ask whether they would be prepared to meet the committee with our officers present, and they said of course they would be if that was the committee's wish. And I think that's probably all I needed to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and thanks for raising that with BDO. I think it's worth just reminding everyone in the meeting this evening that we've had issues with either delayed or non-existent audits now for too long. for at least, I'm looking at Councillor Corey, trying to remember whether I've got this right, but it must be at least 6 years, if not a little bit longer than that we've either had delayed audits, because I remember sitting in this chair having to sign something off a month or two after they were due in my first iteration as chair of this committee. So it's not something new, and it's unfortunate, but it's something that we've got used to dealing with. And I will just say what I've said for the last 18 months, that having a new Section 151 officer actually gives me reassurance, because I am sure that if Andrew had spotted anything over that time, he would have been certain to raise it with Cabinet and with this committee, because he wouldn't want to be holding responsibility for that for 18 months and into the future. He'd have raised it with us. So I'm not particularly concerned about the fact that we haven't managed to get BDO to produce our audited accounts. I do, however, note that BDO are willing to come along and meet with members of the committee. And I did have a quick chat with Mr. Evans before the meeting this evening, and I've asked Mr. Evans just to go back and have a look and see whether there's any way we can squeeze anything into the calendar in the time that we'd have BDO available to us to do that. So I'll ask him to take that away. Questions, comments on the update? Councillor Sunnucks?
Yes, I'm really, really pleased that BDO are prepared to meet us. And I think it just gives sort of massive assurance that I think it's a tremendous control, actually. I've had it done to me. I've had to step out of the boardroom while the auditors talk to non-executive directors, and you sort of get a slightly uncomfortable feeling. But at the end of the day, you know that everyone's on the same page and there's no hidden agenda. So I think that's really, really good. Very positive indeed. What's more challenging is that I think everyone had been hoping that the new government would come in and say, we don't need accounts, what do we need them for? We're going to have an amnesty of some kind. Well, it's quite clear they've given us a couple of months extra, and that's it. So we do have to do it. We do have to address these problems and find a solution. And I'm just hoping that we'll see a renewed determination to do that. We've suggested lots of things and they haven't been done. And there are things we can do, but it's quite a task. And one of the things that's on my mind is that, there's some really complicated adjustments with off-balance sheet leases coming on balance sheet this year. You know exactly what I'm referring to. There's some really complicated things to sort out. And I'd hope that this committee will hear about them as soon as possible. Presumably, we'll be getting some accounts for 23-24 fairly soon, and presumably that will include all that off-balance sheet stuff all sorted out, and there's a lot of head shaking going on there, so I'll be quiet.
Councillor Sunnucks, thank you. I'll just before I bring Andrew and Emma back in, I was going to say I had a quick chat with Emma before the meeting, saying that we would like to meet with her in camera at some point that's mutually convenient. So that has been flagged, and I'm sure that we will do our darndest to ensure that we can come up with a time that suits most, if not all of us, going forward, for us to have that off the books chat, if you like.
But we will have BDO, won't we? They're the important ones.
We will do. I say I've tasked Mr. Evans to go away and see if we can arrange something with BDO before it's too late for us to do so. Councillor Dundas, just on this point.
Yeah, just very briefly. I think I'm right in saying, if we think back to our last meeting, it is actually one of the SIPA recommendations that councillors or members of the committee meet without officers with the auditors. So I think we established that we couldn't tick every box on the SIP for guidelines for practical reasons, but it would be a positive step towards actually complying with those guidelines. So I think it's something we should try and do.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dundas. I was going to say, this is the one that we felt was a key, didn't we? Councillor Naylor, welcome. Andrew, did you want to come back? No, Councillor Corey.
Yeah, I do think clarification over when we're next going to get some concrete accounts would be useful. But I just wanted to reaffirm that it will be really helpful to look in the whites of the eyes of BDO, really to understand why some of their failures have come to play. For me, there's absolute trust in the new officer team that we've had over the last 18 months. Andrew and Chris have really helped to open up some of our processes and have told us where the warts and all are. So I'm absolutely convinced that there are no further stones to be sort of unturned in their sort of perspective. But of course, we will continue to transform, continue to learn, and a lot of that has come from Chris and Andrew's input as to how to better when it comes down to just the sheer presentation of some of the work we do. But local government accounts will never be straightforward, not so much as business accounts. But anyway, I'll pass over for Officer.
Yeah, I just add before Andrew comes in that the presentation of the accounts over the last 18 months has improved in leaps and bounds. Andrew, over to you.
Complexity of local government accounting is obviously what keeps me in a job. So I'm not, well, even though I struggle with it as much as many, if I'm honest with you, and it's probably only Emma from KPMG that understands it really, if I'm honest with you, and a few select others. In terms of producing accounts for 23-24, we're currently targeting the end of October now. We've had some staffing issues, regrettably, which we've now pushed through, and we're back on track to deliver them at the end of 23-24. So you'll receive a set of draft accounts by that date. I mean, just to be clear though, and if it wasn't clear, what you'll get from BDO by the December backstop date for 21-22 and 22-23 is a disclaimed opinion, which is basically them saying that we haven't had enough time to do any substantive work on the accounts, and therefore we're disclaiming them basically. So it won't be an audit opinion upon the quality of those accounts, I'm afraid. And that's going to mirror, I would think, the vast majority of opinions for those accounts up and down the country. And that's the reality of it, I'm afraid. We'll probably see modified or disclaimed opinions for a number of years thereafter. And again, we're not exceptional in that. This is a national issue that the government has sought to intervene in, really, if I'm honest. So it is, I'm afraid, as they say, what it is at this point in time. I think, and I just would say that nobody's happy about it, including us, as much as anything. I think we'd love to be able to give the committee some reassurance about the council's financial position, or well, actually some external reassurance about the council's financial position, but the situation is such that it is just not possible at this point in time. I think Emma would like to speak, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, I just think it's just worth flagging to the committee that obviously as at this point in time we have done very limited work. So getting accounts at the end of October, we therefore have a backstop date at the end of February. That is very, very challenging. And so I just want to manage expectations at this point in time that my focus is on the VFM perspective, because that absolutely has to be delivered by the end of February. And actually I think that is probably one of the most useful elements that we do to give assurance around arrangements in place across the authority to achieve financial sustainability. Me and Andrew will work through where we get to, given that delayed timetable of getting accounts to us, obviously not till November. But we'll work through that and give an update in due course.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Andrew. So I think just a reminder, members, that what we're being told is the world isn't going to be perfect yet. Okay. Right, that's item 8.1. I haven't seen any other indications. So we've had the update from our section 151 officer. We've had the opportunity to have a quick chat with Emma, and we've got some indication of what's coming down the pipeline, and I'll leave Mr. Evans to do his best to arrange our meeting with Emma, and also, if possible, a meeting with BDO. Right, that moves us on to item 2, the Q4 Budget Monitoring Report. Back over to you then, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. My apologies, I was on leave last week, so and Chris Hartgrove couldn't be here tonight. Chris has done much of the detailed work on this and has prepared me a script that I can give to you this evening, which sets out some of the key details. So apologies if I read this out, but I think he's done a better job than I would have done without his assistance. So this is the Q4 Budget Monitoring Report, which is essentially the provisional outturn for 23-24. So these aren't even the draft accounts, but this gives a management update on the outturn of 23-24. So it's item 8.2, which appears on the pages 69 to 102 of your document pack this evening, sets out the Q4 provisional outturn position for 23-24. The report covers the revenue and capital positions for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account. The report also sets out findings from a year-end review of the Council's General Fund revenue reserves in Section 7 of the report, appearing on pages 75 to 78 of your document pack. As highlighted in previous quarters, in 23-24, Colchester City Council, as with other councils up and down the country, experienced severe several financial challenges in the year as it tried to manage the local impact of a difficult economic backdrop. Difficult in its own right, of course, but also one that was driven by service demand. The table in paragraph 6.1 on page 72 reveals a General Fund net revenue overspend of 461,000. This represents a significant improvement, of course, compared to the projected overspend of 1.916 million at the end of Q3. The improved position predominantly reflects the impact of a year-end review of budget roll-forward requests, which resulted in a positive adjustment of £1.5 million. The Q3 forecast assumed that all budget roll-forward requests would be granted. Service budgets were overspent by £2.955 million, but this is heavily mitigated by an underspend of £2.494 million on corporate items, and most notably financing costs, which were £2.111 million underspent. As previously reported, the headline service pressure was homelessness / temporary accommodation of £1.216 million. Income shortfalls were also recorded in several areas, including planning, bereavement services, and the Amphora dividend. The funding outturn position is presented in the table as at paragraph 6.3 on page 74. It shows a positive position with government grants received, including Revenue Support Grant, RSG, exceeding expectations by just over £500,000. The Housing Revenue Account, HRA budget, presented in paragraph 8.1 on page 79, recorded a budget surplus of £172,000, with a significant overspend of £1.9 million on repairs and maintenance being absorbed by a range of other savings, including substantially reduced utility costs, which is the impact of just under £500,000. The table in paragraph 8.4 on page 81 shows there was limited movement on the HRA reserve balance, which ended the year at £4,380,000 compared to a minimum balance assumed of £1.6 million. Turning briefly to capital expenditure, the General Fund programme is presented on section 9, beginning on pages 81, including Appendix D. Capital spending continued to be subdued in Q4, with an overall underspend of £78 million eventually recorded for the year, with originally a planned loan advances of £26.7 million to the Council's new housing company not materialising being the largest item. These have now been removed from the capital programme in 24-25. On the Housing Revenue Account capital programme is presented on section 10, beginning on page 83. As with the general fund, spending was also significantly below the originally assumed within the programme, with an overall underspend of £22 million, just under, eventually being recorded for the year, with slippage of £12.123 million on the Council House New Build programme being the largest item. And finally, section 7, beginning on page 75, covers the year-end review of the Council's General Fund reserves, as mentioned. It is worth highlighting that the historic context at the outset, highlighting the historic context at the outset, as shown in the bar chart on paragraph 74 on page 75, which sets out a 10-year balance sheet history. The Council's General Fund revenue reserves are currently in a healthy position, and the Council received a substantial Section 31 receipts from the Government by way of compensation for business rates reliefs awarded as part of the start of the pandemic in 2021. In accordance with the Government guidelines, the balance of these receipts was applied over 3 years to address Colchester's share of successive collection fund deficits. However, the collection fund has now bounced back, predominantly due to consistently strong returns from business rates, with a surplus now restored since 31st of March 2023. With the annual deficit contributions to the collection fund no longer required, the Council's overall revenue reserves remained around £30 million as at the 31st of March 2024, which is higher than was typically the case pre-pandemic. It is in that context that the review of reserves has taken place. The outcome is summarised in the table of paragraph 7.5 on page 76. It shows that the overall general fund reserves ended 23-24 at 29.627 million. Taking account of the available balances, the review considered updated risks and priorities, as well as taking the opportunity to make a further step forward in reporting transparency and good accounting practice. The outcome is summarised in the right-hand column of the table. The key points to note include: there has been a significant reallocation of reserves based upon updated circumstances and priorities. This has purposely entailed returning available reserves to the General Fund unallocated reserve in the first instance, prior to targeted reallocation of the surplus of reserves for specific purposes. In short, 15.619 million was put into the General Fund reserve, with 10.877 million reallocated out. This leaves an unallocated balance of 6.917 million as at the 31st of March 2024, which the committee is asked to note. It is deliberately and significantly higher than the opening balance of 2.175 million at the start of the year, and the unallocated balance that the Council has been operating with in recent years, which was the unallocated balance. It now meets the minimum 3.0 million contingency balance adopted by the Council in February 2024, and provides some further resilience against potential unplanned budgetary pressures, etc. Quarter 1, 2024-25 is an example, which is covered in the next report on your agenda this evening. Members are also requested to note that the apparent change in accounting practice is nothing new to Colchester, with the approach restoring the unallocated balance to the sort of levels that the Council operated with pre-COVID. Paragraph 7.6 provides summary details of the significant reserves adjustments made to both existing and newly created reserves, as well as the change in approach in the General Fund unallocated reserve. Some significant existing reserves were returned to the General Fund reserve in full, such as the future years budget reserve, the pension fund's deficit reserve, and the revolving investment fund. 6.68 million was also taken from business rates reserve, and new earmark reserves have been created covering risk areas such as turnstone, restructuring, and landlord health and safety responsibilities, with significant provision made for corporate priorities such as City Investment Fund to replace the rolling infrastructure fund, as well as Fit for the Future, and to further improve transparency. A separate reserve has now been created exclusively to hold rolled forward budget commitments. That concludes the narrative. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you, Mr. Small. I think that's quite a detailed overview of the report that's in front of us this evening. It certainly answers most, if not all, of the queries that I had about what's in here, but no doubt there'll be one or two others. So I'm just going to pass around. Councillor Dundas, I saw your hand first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for the report. Rest assured, I'm not going to go through every page either. In actual fact, in terms of a lot of the variances, we have discussed them, particularly on the expenditure side. We have discussed them at past meetings, actually, because a lot of them were quite apparent at Q2 and Q3. So, in actual fact, the outturn is not far off what we assumed from the last time we looked at this. What I did was I wanted to pick up on two areas, and one I know Councillor Sunnix has had some correspondence with Chris Hartgrove over. I haven't got an issue with the figures at all. They're correct and fine, so that's not what I'm saying. But in terms of how we present the general fund and the reserves, the reason why I think we have to be a little bit careful, and I know this is how Colchester has presented it in the past, so it's not a new thing. If we take at face value the paragraph 6.3 and the table, and a councillor or a member of the public looks at it, local government councils, their deficit, in effect, whether they spend more than they get, can really only be financed from reserves, because that is, in effect, his capital account. So it's equivalent of a profit and loss charge to a capital account in a commercial company. And on face value, any councillor look at it will look at the line and say, contribution to from reserves over 4 million. So they're likely to say, oh my God, we've had to make all these cuts and do all these things because we've lost 4 million quid this year. But the truth is we haven't, because if we look at the actual overall reserves movement, we've had a deficit of 615,000, which is considerably better than actually we were expecting throughout most of the year. The reason, of course, and it is explained in the documents, is the business rate reserve has performed much better than expected. So we've had a large amount of income, unexpected income, about £3 million into that. Now, my view is that in future years, and I get why it's done like that, because it is volatile, but there's lots of other things which are volatile we put through the general fund. Interest rates, for example, we've put extra income from, although they're on the expenditure side because it's offsetted, we've put a change in interest rates, which is a variable thing, into the general fund, but the business reserves we don't. And I feel that we are potentially giving an overly negative picture of how the council performed last year, and there is the potential to make decisions against that figure when people see that figure. So all I would ask is perhaps we reconsider how we treat that in future years. And I think there's a good argument for doing so. My only other comment on the reserves is I support the creation of the new ones. I think they're sensible. And I think, as much as anybody can estimate these, I think the figures allocated to them are generally quite sensible as well. You're never going to get them perfectly right, but I think they're quite sensible. Equally, though, I think we need the whole picture for councillors as to what's happening on the finances in one place. So I hope equally changes to those reserves and charges to them, for whatever reason, also go through the general fund in future years, because I think it's really important it is in effect in one table, because at the moment the only way you get the true picture of the council is to start looking at multiple tables, and that's probably not an ideal way to present it to councillors or the public.
Thank you. Before I bring you back in, Councillor Dundas, I think I heard you making a recommendation there, and I'm mindful of the role that we are moving towards playing in terms of suggesting things to cabinet
I'm
and to
happy to put
portfolio
that as a
holders.
recommendation.
So I think I would like to see us making a recommendation to the portfolio holder. It's then for the administration whether or not they want to take them, that they reconsider how the business rate reserves are managed and reported in the budget for 25-26. Have I got that right? Yeah. Is that what you were suggesting?
I think that generally, as a general direction, major changes to the reserves, be it business rates and indeed the newly created ones, should go through the general fund, so we get a picture in one place.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'll bring Councillor Corey in and then Mr. Small.
Thank you. Andrew will definitely answer more of that latter point, but I want to reassure the panel this evening, and I looked over my shoulder at David as well, that both David and I have had these conversations with Andrew specifically, Andrew and Chris, specifically about the business rates income. So we went to LG Futures specifically to look at the business rates income to do some predictions for us, because both David and I were eager to use that money that was being put into reserves to try and help soften the changes that we are absolutely having to take as a council. It would not solve all of our problems, but it definitely is something that we can use. But Councillor Dundas is right to say that it's another volatile figure, so we have to be careful. So what we are doing is we are prudently increasing the amount of the business rates income that we put into the base budget as opposed to what we put into the reserve. So we did get a report back from LG Futures which says, yes, you are consistently overperforming, so you could take some of that into consideration in the base budget, but beware, it is volatile. Beware, government have said year on year business rates collection and sharing and pooling that we're part of will be reformed and will change. That was delayed and delayed and delayed. So we don't know when and if that will happen. We've just had the election. We haven't heard any dramatic statements from this new government about changing of the ways that the collection is done or the pooling systems. But they have meant to end and they've meant to change for quite some time. So we can't move all of that income into the base budget because we'll then be at quite a risk when reform comes. But if reform does come, what government tend to do also is do an easing, so they wouldn't bring it in straight away and they would see us have a continued amount declining over time. So just to reassure the panel that as portfolio holder working with the leader and working with the chief officers, we are taking more of that income into the base budget to help the organisation, but only to a prudent level because it is volatile. I hand to Andrew for the rest of the answers.
Thank you. And I think, as been said before, actually, we're on a bit of a journey in terms of accounts presentation. I think we've made some good progress. There are some peculiarities about the way that Colchester has presented its financial information in the past and how it's dealt with the treatment of reserves. I think, I agree with Councillor Dundas about kind of a move to improve transparency. Management information is there to provide a simple summary to all members of the council and residents about the financial affairs of the council. And so we need to put it into a format where it is easily understood. And I would agree with that. I think some of the movements from reserves have been more complex and might otherwise have been necessary. And I think we'd continue on that journey to try and simplify and make the presentation more transparent in future, as I hope you will have seen with reports that have been produced in the last year or so. On the business rates point, I don't really want to add to what Councillor Corey has said really, but just to say that I think Colchester has been very prudent in the past in terms of it's not becoming reliant upon business rates gain. It would have been very easy, very tempting to do so. But the government, from the outset, when it introduced the business rates retention system, said that it would be reset every 5 years. We're well overdue for that at the moment. And if it did, then our loss would be somewhere in the order of £7 million a year. I think it was calculated out recently. So I think not becoming wholly reliant upon that is a sensible strategy. and I think has served Colchester particularly well. Putting that money into a reserve and then spending money that you have in your bank, as opposed to spending money that you may or may not get in the future, has given Colchester healthy balances and enabled it to deal with a lot of problems that other councils are wrestling with one way or the other. So I think, it does need to be reviewed. I think there is opportunity, portfolio holder, to decide to look at that differently. But, we do need to be mindful of the risks in doing so as well, which is exactly what the portfolio holder is advocating. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So being mindful of the cautions that our Section 151 officer has just raised for us, can I just take a sense around the table that you're in favour of the recommendation that we put to the portfolio holder? Yep. Okay, thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Just very briefly, and I absolutely take your point on the volatility, although it's interesting, this is a historic thing. We haven't actually been very consistent, because every single word Councillor Corey said, and I agree with what he said, could also have been applied to the new homes bonus, which we've always put in the general fund. So, it's interesting that decisions taken and we get stuck on these roads. So, yeah, I guess there's perhaps no right or wrong answer, but...
Okay. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I'm really pleased that I'm pleased with the idea that we put the business rates through the business rates through the income statement. Really pleased with that, and I'm really pleased that the council's outturn is a little bit better than we thought. I'm absolutely, when we had the Q3 management report, it showed a 6 million loss, and I was expecting reserves to go down by 6 million. And they haven't really gone down at all. They've just gone down marginally. And we seem to have been saved by this business rates thing, which you can't see the we've lost 4 million this year, according to the income statement. You can't see the 4 million on this presentation. I want to say that the presentation is better than it's been before, and that all these questions arise because it's better. So we're heading in the right direction, but there's still some really substantial points. So first of all, where's the 4 million loss reflected in these reserves? There's the 4 odd million gain on the business rates, 3835, I imagine, is the figure we're referring to. But what about all those other things in columns 2 and 3 on page 76? All my queries relate to page 76. So there's lots and lots of smaller movements, and why are they all going through reserves? And I've asked Chris Hartgrove, and the answer I got was really interesting. He said, well, we only put budgeted items through the income statement. We only put budgeted items, so it's an unbudgeted item. It doesn't go through that. So the other things are presumably all going through reserves. And I feel as a Governance and Audit Committee, we need to have a look and understand them. So it's not just the business rates thing. For example, we know we've got some write-offs on the CCHL hibernation. Where have they gone through? Can we try to understand that? The biggest figure is the business rates, but there's loads of other things just going through there. And if you looked at this in a really nasty way, you could say that we've been not declaring income that we've had in. We've been blaming central government for not giving us enough money. And then lo and behold, they have actually given us enough money. And then suddenly, when we've got a property development that's gone wrong, we're taking 4 million of that money that we've been given and hidden away, and which could have been spent on homeless and all the other good things that we'd like to do, but that's actually going to be spent on digging ourselves out of a property problem. And I've got 2 other points to make. The first is the quantum, the writing back the pension reserve. I'm really nervous about doing that, because if you look at our accounts, it looks as if our service cost for pensions exceeds what we're paying in. So I wouldn't expect the pension problem to go away. I can see that we've had a massive swing because of the interest rate changes. We've had a massive swing from deficit to surplus overall on the pension fund, but I wouldn't feel we could guarantee that to last forever. And I wonder whether we are a bit imprudent in writing back the whole lot in one go. The second thing is I'm just really pleased we've come clean on Turnstone. So that's really good, and we got a figure, and it's probably not an unreasonable figure, but we're going to have some much bigger figures coming through in the balance sheet when we put that onto the balance sheet. So, and it's really alarming on Turnstone that we have all these early warning indicators and lots of elaborate risk indicators and so on. And never once has it appeared in our accounting figures before today, and never once has it appeared in any of the risk matrices before today. So as a Governance and Audit Committee, we should be really worried that our indicators are not bleeping, are not warning us when a really serious problem comes up.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. I think just before I bring in individuals for responses, I just want to reiterate what I've said at previous governance and audit meetings, that anything to do with Northern Gateway development, we shouldn't discuss in public session if we're talking about the finances in any way, shape or form. So, and I will just remind you all that I have made it quite clear to the Leader of the Council and to the Chief Exec that at some point in the very near future, when it's prudent to do so, because I understand that there are still some I's to be dotted and some T's to be crossed before we know what the exact position is, that all 51 members of the Council will be given a full and frank briefing on what is happening with Northern Gateway. Right, and I'm just going to bring you in, Councillor Corey, first of all, because I think one or two of the comments from Councillor Sunnox there were more to do with the politics of the piece, and then we'll pass on to Andrew just to answer one or two of the points about how we're accounting for things.
Thank you. In terms of some of the risk, we have been highlighting that our commercial deals are risky, and that has been something we have dealt with. But in terms of the specifics about Turnstone, yes, we've got more specific about it now, because it's now when it starts taking place in terms of the finances going into our books and out. So we've made an allocation in reserves because we have to allocate for that risk. So in terms of, that's why it appears, because it starts appearing in the tense that we're getting money from Turnstone, and we're going to be losing some money going forward as well. So I wanted to address that. Secondly, the Amphora dividend is mentioned in the report. There's a section on page 69, 1.5 that I'm looking at now, and there are other areas in the report, but it shows the Amphora dividend combined with other shortfalls in services coming to 1.006 million. And what we have done is taken the costs of Amphora within last year's budget. It is now baked in and done. So we have dealt with that within this report. I think that's everything I was going to say, Chair, but I'll come back if not.
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of points, I think, from Councillor Sunnox. I don't think that we've hidden, the business rates money, really. I think it's come as a bit of a, there's been a bit of a bounce back post-COVID, really. There was a number of fallow years as a result of the impact of COVID virus on business rates and businesses generally, but and it's bounced back quite strongly. So I think that was a pleasant surprise at some level, really. I think that, and I accepted back to Councillor Dundas's points earlier, really, that there's some of the information is spread across a number of tables, and I think that absolutely is unhelpful in terms of getting an overall clear position on the financial position. But we have reported the reserves of the council, we have reported the trading position and so on. I think all of the information is there, it just might not be brought together in a form that makes it completely understandable. I think, as I said earlier, the commitment is to continue to improve the presentation so that it is easily understandable to all, and we're working and we'll continue to work on that. I think probably the treatment of reserves has been one of the more complex areas of presentation in the past, and that's our ongoing focus for now. On the pension fund reserve, there are two different valuation methods, really. One is the valuation method that appears in the accounts, which is IFRS 17. Oh, don't know, remembered. Which is it's a point-in-time valuation done annually for the accounts. And then there's a triennial valuation done by the scheme's actuaries every 3 years, obviously, which determines the level of contributions made by the council into the pension fund. And that's done on a much longer time frame. That's an actuarial assessment. We tend to see the IFRS 17 valuation go up and down. There's huge swings year on year in determining whether it's losses or gains. And it's done because we have to do it for the whole government accounts, and we have to do it to comply with international financial reporting standards. But it's one of those transactions within the accounts that makes a nonsense of the overall understandability, I think, of the position, and also gives our auditor colleagues a real headache in terms of the audit at the end of the year as well. What we should focus on is the triennial valuation, because this is the long-term assessment of how much we need to put away as a council to meet our liabilities, and that's gone into surplus. I have some sympathy in terms of that it has returned to a surplus after a few years, it has to be said. But on the other hand, I think that there's reason. I think the reason to sit on it for another 3 years is probably unnecessary at this point in time, I would argue. And the council's affairs of reserves are such that when the next triennial evaluation comes forward, and we'll get about 12 to 18 months for warning of the impact of that, then if there's a problem, then we can deal with it at that point in time. So I think we're okay to do it, would be my recommendation to the committee. There was a third point as well, which I can't recall at this point in time.
CCHL write-offs.
Yes, so we've taken advice. They are in there. I think the total write-off to the general fund was about £275,000, which is less than I thought it would be. I think most of it because there were capital advances and there was provision made for MRP within the council books. That's been applied to the balances outstanding, so the net amount that we needed to write off was quite low compared to what I thought it was going to be. So that's been accommodated within the overall outturn position. And I think in terms of the accounting complexity of the transaction itself, perhaps we can address that when the draft accounts come forward, because that'll be in the balance sheet. But we've taken advice on that, and it is built into the draft accounts, or will be at least.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on a point that you made and also the portfolio holder made. You mentioned, of course, that the finances relating to Turnstone should be discussed in private, and portfolio holder alluded to what was currently happening. Can I request that we have an update in Part B today on where we've got to since the last update in the last committee meeting, please?
Okay, it wasn't my intention for us to have a Part B unless anybody wanted to raise anything to do with the minutes, because we don't have a formal Part B on the agenda for this evening. I think let me deal with that when we have a break, okay? We're coming to the end of the item. I haven't seen any other indications, so I'm just going to remind everyone that we had, and I won't read through them this time, we've got 5 things to note that we've noted by going through the report, and the recommendation, everyone in favour of the recommendation that we sent to the portfolio holder about business rates accounting? Fine, I'm seeing nods around the table. So
and other reserve movements.
And other reserve.
Everything through the income statement.
Okay. And those are the things that we were asked to do with this item. So can I just have nods that we've done all that? Yeah, thank you very much. What I'm proposing now then, is it's coming up to 7:30, is that we have a break for 10 minutes, because I was told off last time that 5 minutes isn't quite long enough for anybody who wants a smoke to get down. So we will break for 10 minutes. We'll meet back here sharpish at 20 to 8, please. Thank you. Evening and welcome back everyone to the part 2 of the Governance and Audit meeting. And we just completed item 8.2, so we're now on to item 8(3), the Q1 Budget Monitoring Report. Over to you again, please, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. And another script from Chris Hartgrove, I'm afraid. So, well, actually not afraid at all. I'm very grateful to him for doing so, if I'm honest. But this one's a shorter one, you'll be pleased to hear. So, Q1 Budget Monitoring Report. Item 8, which appears in pages 103 to 126 of your document pack, sets out the Q1 position for 24-25, i.e. the forecast outturn for this, the 24-25 financial year, based upon available information as at the 30th of June 2024. The report covers the revenue and capital positions for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account, as well as the respective funding positions. It is also worth highlighting to the committee an important presentational change in paragraph 6.1 on page 105. You will now note just 3 columns and significantly greater clarity than you will have previously received. This is made possible by an underlying change in accounting practice, which now means that the budget fixed by the Council back in February 24, in this case, does not change for the duration of the financial year. Hopefully, this demonstrates a further step towards increased transparency, of which there is more to come in future iterations of this report. To the detail, unfortunately, it has not been a good start to the financial year for the Council. Paragraphs 6.1 and 6.2, including appendices A and B, set out several significant financial pressures, and once again, homelessness / temporary accommodation is the headline, with a forecast overspend of £826,000 as at Q1 stage being the largest single item, driving an overall forecast overspend of £2.048 million. There is also forecast overspend of £549,000 on neighbourhood services, with an underlying pressure of £308,000 on income from garden waste collections being the most notable factor. This is due to the necessary accounting treatment of memberships / subscriptions paid in 23-24, which are required to be credited in full to that year, unlike the service charge, which is matched to the services provided. The table in paragraph 6.3 shows that the funding assumptions are mostly on track at Q1 stage, with, of course, the notable exception of revenue contributions. If the forecast overspend emerges as projected, a contribution from the General Fund Reserve of £1.536 million will be required, as opposed to the assumed contribution to the reserve of £512,000, as assumed in the budget. As presented in the table in paragraph 7.3, this would leave a balance of £5.381 million in the General Fund unallocated reserve, a disappointing reduction of course, but nevertheless still leaving a balance comfortably above the adopted minimum contingency of £3 million. The HRA forecast is presented in section 8 of this report, beginning on page 110. It shows a good start to the year with additional income of £1,391,000 anticipated, with rental incomes performing strongly. 24-25 is a 53-week rent year, and an additional 36 units have been added at Greenstead in March 2024 after the budget was set. In addition, right to buy sales are also lower than usual, retaining rent generating stock for longer. The HRA balance of £4,380,000 is forecast to remain unchanged, well above the minimum £1.6 million assumed in the current HRA business plan. To briefly finish off, the capital programme forecast is presented in section 9, General Fund, and section 10, HRA. Spending on both the General Fund and the HRA capital has been subdued in Q1, with notable slippage on levelling up schemes such as St Botolph's roundabout impact £1 million, which is the single largest element of slippage on the General Fund programme, which is driving the overall forecast slippage of £43 million as presented in the table on page 112. That concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Excuse me. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of comments and questions. Obviously, you know, as you say, it's probably for the reasons given, not heading in the direction we'd like. We were anticipating a surplus, so although we're looking at a 2 million deficit, that's slightly mitigated by the fact that we were looking to put some back in reserves anyway. And that's obviously notwithstanding a better performance, as we've just spoken about, of the business rates reserves. But nonetheless, equally as we've spoken about, and we're repeating ourselves a little bit, there are dangers in there. I'm not going to discuss Turnstone in detail again, because we've been through that, and the details are confidential, but we have got that £4 million figure in there, so that gives a scale of probably potentially we think the risk. So if you take that 2 million, you add another 2 million from potential commercial losses. It's not clear to me that there have been any changes or assumptions around wage settlements, because we know that hasn't been agreed yet. Being realistic, we know there are pressures there because we know what's going on outside of the council. Depending on the wage settlement and that 2 million back of an envelope, you know, it could quite easily turn into 5 million, knowing potential risks that we do. So there are dangers there, and I guess we'll just have to see how they materialise. Also, as an example, what I hadn't realised and I now know, and perhaps it was in there and it should have been apparent, is that there was actually revenue included in the budget we passed in February from the Turnstone project. I'll be absolutely honest, perhaps I probably missed it. I wasn't aware of that, and I don't think this committee was aware of that when we scrutinised it, because I think if we had been, knowing what we knew about what was going on in the external world, we might have said, well, hang on folks, is that a good idea or not? So I think that's just an example of why stuff not being clear or moving around in reserves isn't a good idea. The only specific questions I have, though, apart from the assumptions you're making around wage settlements, is there's a paragraph in there on the budget overspend of 0.59 million on neighbourhood services on page 103, due to accounting treatments. I understood, if I remember rightly, that because of the accounting treatment, it had a negative effect on last year, and was going to have because he had to move the revenue into the year the service was provided. So I think there was about a £500,000 hit on last year's budget, and that was going to be brought forward into this year's. So I just wonder if you could just further expand on exactly what's happened there. The other thing is on the capital outturn. I know we had a great discussion in February about the enabling works at is it Northern Gateway South? I can't remember which. I see that we're now looking that is going forward a bit into perhaps not this financial year, but next financial year. Now, we were told when that was passed that there was a time pressure on that due to a window allocated by Highways England. So my second question is, are we on target for that? Because it looks like we're getting very, very near the deadline. And finally, just a general comment on St Botolph's. I mean, that isn't really, I mean, although we're involved in it, as I understand it, it's kind of an accounting thing that we're handing the money, that it's that the levelling up grant comes to us, and then we pay it, but it's not really a CCC managed project as such, it's an ECC one. So that's, you know, it's kind of a bit of a technicality that the money is passing through our accounts. If I just want to check my interpretation is right.
Thank you. Andrew.
So a few points in there, and please bear with me if I forget all of those questions. I think the first thing to say is it's not uncommon for... It tends to be the case that people are much more willing to come forward with financial problems than they are with financial solutions. So at the start of the year, it's probably not uncommon to see a spike in pessimistic forecasts for the year, really. That said, I mean, we're a quarter in, or actually a couple more months thereafter. But so this gives us the opportunity to try and think about mitigations for the position, I suppose, really. And there's quite a bit of work. I don't probably want to go on to it in detail here, but there's quite a bit of work going on to try and think of how we can reduce that in-year overspending, whether it's around homelessness or other actions, for example. So we are working as an officer team with Cabinet to think about what actions we can take to try and reduce that forecast overspend, so it doesn't either increase or, or hopefully, we are dealing with some challenges, result in that level of reduction in general fund reserves at the year end. There's an opportunity to do something about it, I suppose. Straight away, I've forgotten the second question, which I had a really good answer for.
Assumptions around wages, are we still keeping the same ones as we had in February?
I think we are, at the moment, I think we're aware that there's a potential pressure there. I mean, we obviously want to wait and see what happens in a kind of a national space around local government pay settlements. That will obviously determine the pressure on us really this year. I think it's a risk. I think it's acknowledged as such, but we don't really know how to quantify it at this point in time, other than to acknowledge that we're aware of it at this time. Can you help me with the next question, Councillor?
Of course I can. And just as a general comment, I accept this is a snapshot and forecast, and if we think back to last year, it bounced around all over the place, depending on which month we were looking at it. My other comments were on the garden waste changes, which is on page 103, and the Colchester Northern Gateway South Enabling Works, I think, to give its correct title.
So I think the accounting treatment was a confusion in both years, if I'm honest with you. Really, I think based upon the level of income that was being generated, we thought that would continue into 24-25. But there was a misunderstanding, or a misunderstanding about the subscription element, or the start-up fee, which is recorded in the year and which is paid, as opposed to the service provision element, which has to be apportioned over the period that service is being provided, and that's split over 2 years. So the total amount of income that was collected was assumed to be rolled forward or projected forward into the next year, and that included an element that was only going to be payable in 1 year, in the first year last year. So I think it was an error, if I'm honest with you, in both years, and that's probably what we're highlighting there. And on Colchester Northern Gateway, I don't know the current position in terms of delivery of that scheme. I don't know whether Councillor Corey does.
I'll have to get back to you and the committee. I'm trying to find my latest update, and I can't. Essentially, we rushed it forward to keep the door open. But I believe that door has been opened longer, which is supportive to us, and also means that we always said we would not take out the borrowing until we know we need to do it. But we had to put that report through in order to enable us to do it, to meet that time frame. I believe the time frame has slipped in our favour effectively, but I'll have to find the update and get that to members. Thank you.
If I can just follow up on that, I suppose the query for this committee would be how long before the slippage starts to actually impact on the cost with inflationary pressures. Yeah, and that's something that we'd also like some opinion on. Okay, thank you. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I'm delighted that you've stopped doing carry forwards. It makes life so much easier and clearer, and I think you'll find your budget management a lot easier. The thing you've got to watch for is Operation. It used to have all sorts of names, so I always called it Operation Overspend when you get to the end of the financial year, because people know they're going to use it or lose it. And I think you should make it quite clear that that's completely unacceptable. And if they haven't spent it, then they lose it, and they've got to put it in the next year's budget. The housing revenue account shows very smooth, beautiful blue water. Nice deficit, nice surpluses rather, which we're ploughing back into housing. and it all looks absolutely wonderful. We know that it's not. We know that the appraisals don't work. We know that the housing HRA review, I'm sure those figures don't work. I haven't seen them, but I'm absolutely sure they won't work at current interest rates. And I think the big reason is that we're capitalising major repairs. And I'm saying this very loudly while our new auditor from KPMG's here. Are we really sure that we're depreciating, putting the depreciation we should be through and the interest we should put through on those major repairs, particularly the depreciation? And when you look at the medium-term financial plan, which went to Cabinet, it's pretty clear that the sort of depreciation period's like 172 years or something like that. So in our projections, I'm pretty sure we're not. And I think it's sort of one of my major audit queries would be, are we depreciating those correctly in our current accounts? It's probably not a question you can answer immediately. I've got a couple of other questions, if I may, or do you want to stop? No. The next thing is this spectacular capital underspends. I think some American companies, the chief executives, the only thing he looks at is to make sure the capital budgets are spent, because it's telling him how effective the organisation is in delivering what they are going to do. On that measure, we're in the bottom of the class. For years, we've had huge underspends, and for, I think it was September 2022, we were told to do a capital programme review. It's now September 2024, and it's still floating around. And I was really disappointed. The biggest part of it, of course, is the HRA capital expenditure, which is where I think we're weakest on viability. And that review we're expecting this autumn. I now gather it's going to be postponed until after the budget. So that's a worry. You might think I'm straying somewhat off the Q1 results, but it's a question that has to be asked sometime. Why are we delaying the HRA review till after the budget? Why can't we address what is holding us up in addressing the problems now, 2 years after we were told to look at it by the peer review?
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Sunnox. You slipped that one in, but I'll allow Mr. Smalls to come back with a brief response.
I'll kick off. Councillor Corey might like to join in. I think most of the issues associated with the HRA review and the 30-year business plan review will impact future years' budgets, really, and it's the affordability of future years' budgets as opposed to the current budget. That's probably so. I think we can separate the Q1 position out from the 30-year business plan review, which needs to be undertaken. With the risks, as I say, are probably in for future years of the HRA in terms of affordability based upon the spending assumptions that are currently being utilised and will need to be revised. So I don't think it's a current year issue.
I'm thinking of this year's capital programme.
Okay, I understand what you just said there, but also what we've said to officers is that we want some interim findings to understand. So for this year's budget planning process, or the forthcoming year, we will be able to make some changes, interim changes. But as Andrew says, it is the longer term picture in particular. I know you've just said you're also looking at the underspend of in this year as well. I think we'd have to look at the commentary. Both of us here wouldn't be able to answer too much in detail apart from the commentary that's in the papers and the people that were here a bit before us.
And I'm mindful on that one that we are going to have a more detailed look at HRA in the not too distant future. I think there were another couple of points, Andrew, I'll come back to you, that Councillor Sunnox was raising.
So on the issue about depreciation and major repairs reserve, I am satisfied that we are treating it correctly in terms of local government accounting convention around the HRA. So
and in the forecasts?
I can't comment because I don't know how those forecasts were compiled, if I'm honest with you, but I'd like to believe that they were compiled by the people who are doing current budgeting, so they continued on. The assumptions that were used in current budgets are the assumptions that have been applied into the budgeting or the forecasting that has been done up until now. I mean, it will be reviewed, as we know. We will get the results of that 30-year business plan review, and that will highlight or validate the current assumptions.
Is that something you can look at closely, perhaps when you do the budget?
I'm sure we look at it closely every year, Councillor Sykes.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I've got Councillor Kelly next.
This is a much broader question, really, and it might not be a very simple answer to it. As a less accountancy type of person and more of an operational type of person, when I look at these numbers, obviously there's an awful lot of numbers here, and as Councillor Dundas mentioned, these are a snapshot. Would it be possible, and it might not be, to include year-on-year data points for the high-level numbers, such that the less accountancy-minded amongst us can make a reasonable judgment on it? So, for example, if I was to look at on the general fund review table that you've got, where you've got your bottom right-hand cell, which is effectively the headline figure, at a given point in time, that's, to me, right now, is largely meaningless, because I don't know whether that's trending up or trending down, and whether or not you could have some sort of indication as to what it's actually doing, because obviously I'm presuming a member of the public can pull this document as well and is available to them in the same way, and I think that would be helpful to be able to see what direction of travel we've got for these headline figures. And you might be that, well, actually we can't do that for X or Y reason, but is it possible?
I think it's a really good point. So yeah, comparatively, where are we compared to last year? I think there'd be a heavy amount of commentary for two reasons. One, because the budget size changes and we're having to reduce the overall budget size with Fit for the Future. And secondly, we have some quite large amounts that might be written off, for example, the Amphora changes this year. But I think the general principle of it has been mentioned once before in my long and distant memory, but I think it would be good, Andrew, if we can. It's another transparency sort of step forward to make sort of some comparative snapshots, really.
Andrew?
Thank you. A really interesting point. I think we're all about trying to make these documents as digestible as possible. That's very much, I mean, the objective is for it to be, is for the residents or members to pick it up and understand where the council is financially. So I think anything that we can do to try and help that is something that we would like to consider, I think. I think there are still quite a few changes that we'd like to, and more fundamental changes that we need to deal with anyway. We've already highlighted some of the treatments that we're working on improving. I think it was an iterative process, and we are making improvements, and we'll continue to do so. I'm happy to take on board that in terms of how we can do it. The only, I think I can think of a number of challenges in terms of delivering that, if I'm honest with you. But I'm absolutely persuaded by the intention, really. So. We do tend to move services around within service headings year on year, and so making direct comparisons from one year to another might become difficult, but that's an excuse, I think, and I think we need to find a way to actually help answer the question that you're asking in terms of how can we make it more relevant. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I think as you were speaking there, I'd already thought to myself, there's a dilemma that we end up trying to compare apples with oranges because budgets move from year to year. But I think if there is a straightforward way in which you can make comparatives, maybe with the headline figures, that might be worth looking at, if we can do that in a simple way. Because what I wouldn't want to do is make it even more complicated for members around the committee. So if we start, we run the risk of, say, apples and oranges being compared. So I think we just need to be a bit cautious, is my approach to the two of you about that. Did you want to come back very quickly, Mark?
Just specifically on that, yeah, I think we can definitely look at, say, revenue spending by proportion. The less comparative would be capital, And going back to one of William's points, you look at the capital programme and underspends, and there's some substantial reasons for those. It goes back to things like the town projects. So as Paul Dundas commented on earlier, we got the money into our bank account, but we need to ship it out to the people that need to actually spend it and draw it down. And St Bottles roundabout is an example where that's been delayed over time. Then there's other projects where we've stepped back from it. Following the capital review, we've stepped back from projects as well. So we will see significant changes in the capital programme with chunks of money coming out. Especially recently when we've become a bit more risk adverse and therefore money has come out, and then also financing costs for that out of the revenue fund as well.
Okay, thanks very much. So we were asked to note those 4 matters in 2.1 to 2.4, which I think you've done, as well as making some suggestions for how we bring these forward. All noted, members? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to 8.4, the Q1 Treasury Management Update. Back to you again, Andrew, please.
Thank you, Chair. And another presentation, a shorter one this time again. So item 8.4, which appears in pages 127 to 178 of your document pack this evening, sets out the Treasury Management Q1 position for 24-25, i.e. an update based upon available information as at the 30th of June 2024. I don't propose to go through the report in great detail, Chairman, but just to remind the committee that this report provides an update on the adopted Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25, which was considered by this committee on the 18th of June and was subsequently adopted by full council on the 17th of July. For completeness and added transparency, the report also presents, wherever possible, the outturn position for 23-24. On to the detail. Suffice to say, it's been a quiet opening to the financial year. As highlighted in Q1 report that I've just presented, significant slippage on the capital programme is contributing to a suppressed need for external borrowing, with overall borrowing, presented in pages 132 to 134, declining from 151.6 million to 147.6 million during Q1, i.e. a £4 million decline. Coincidentally, Treasury Management investments, presented on pages 134 to 135, have also fallen by £4 million during the period, from £20.5 million to £16.5 million. Performance against the Treasury Management indicators is also presented beginning on page 136. Targets have been met in nearly all cases, with the only exception being an interest rate exposure indicator where there has been a technical breach. However, a review of the position suggests that the indicator is defective rather than the performance. It is proposed to come back to the committee with greater detail on this at the Q2 stage, but members can be assured that the overall risk exposure of £182,000 as at the 30th of June 2024 is nothing to be concerned about. That concludes it, Chairman, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And thanks again to Chris for his fulsome introduction. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to ask a detailed question on the report, actually, but I'm just going to use it as an opportunity to try and educate myself about local government finance a bit. We've discussed actually in the past about inter-council borrowing and lending. And I accept it's not an unusual thing, that it seems to have happened for years. I think my question really is why? What is the rationale behind it? When we're lending £5 million at 5.57% to Eastleigh Borough Council, what is the actual why are they borrowing it? Is it for cash flow? Are they reinvesting it? Are they going down to the pub with it? I don't know. Councils sort of tend to have, they don't have limitless cash, but they don't operate in the way that a conventional business does. So I just wanted a bit of an idea of background as to why we actually do it.
I think you answered your own question to an extent. It is purely about cash flow. I mean, we all have different direct debit collection dates, for example, and as a district council, we don't just collect cash on behalf of ourselves, we collect it on behalf of the county council as well. So a DD run can be quite, a substantial number, as is business rates, we collect that on behalf of the government. So sometimes we find ourselves cash rich and sometimes we find ourselves cash poor. And so, we can go to banks and building societies, less so these days, if I'm honest with you, and banks tend to look for larger sums. The local government market is quite liquid and quite flexible. And, I think, for reasons I think set out in a paper, I think recently, I think that there is, despite 114 notices and the risks around that within the local government sector, I think, local government is still backed by central government in essence. And so, for all of the risks that might come with a 114 notice, the chance of getting repaid is still very, very high in that scenario. So it makes sense to lend it to your neighbours, I think, than it does to lend it to the private sector, if we can. Yeah, I think that's probably summarises it. Thank you, Councillor Dundas.
Thank you. Yeah, and 5.57 is not too bad a rate. So yeah, it was just for background really. I was just curious. It is what I'd assumed, but it's always a good idea never to assume.
Yeah, I say whenever I've looked at these over the years, the rate of return has always looked on the higher side when you compare it to the standard rates out there. So I suppose the borrowing rate is also is more advantageous, and that's likely to be the case, isn't it? Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, I'm really pleased that the amount of this sort of activity of borrowing from one local authority and lending to another, I'm glad that seems to have gone down over the last year, and I would hope that it would go, like Councillor Dundas, I just see it as, if it's short-term cash flows, maybe, if we can make a buck on it, maybe, but we're not good at that sort of thing. We're not qualified to do it. We're not professional investors. And credit risk, there is some, these sort of things, when you're looking at it from a bank's point of view, it's sort of gilt-edged. It's sort of got a guarantee from government, but I don't think there's a specific guarantee that the government will bail out every authority. It was impressive that they bailed out Thurrock with such a huge loan, and I think they replaced the other. So that would be encouraging, but it's not 100%. So we should be realise that we're running risks there, and I'm just pleased that it's coming down a little bit. I've got another question, but let's answer that one first.
Okay, Andrew.
I think the government did bail out some of the banks, I think, during the last kind of Atlantic banking crisis, didn't they? Actually, there was support for nationalisation of some of the banks, I suppose, so the government did step in to support those. But there's no provision for bankruptcy within local government. So local government can't default on the loans because they can't just write them off. They have to get repaid. The government can't, allow an area to become unsupported in terms of no council to provide its services. So councils can't go bust. It's the truth of it. Which means that every loan that you give to another council gets repaid, regardless of a Section 114 notice. So in that regard, they probably are gilt-edged because they're covered by the government's guarantee, whilst banks, depends upon whether the government wants to wade in for national interest to support a bank. So I think, I think in terms of, your security around local government market is probably much better than it is amongst the private sector market, would be my interpretation of it. And I would say, we only borrow for cash flow purposes. We don't borrow, and I think it's a question that Councillor Dundas raised. We can't borrow to on-lend. We can't borrow for the purposes of making profit. So we can only take it, and that's covered. That's very much strongly set out within the Prudential Code. We can only borrow for cash flow requirement.
Okay, thank you. One more.
I'd agree that it's less risky than lending to the private sector, so that's common ground. The other thing I've got is the table on, I think it's page 130, table 2, balance sheet summary and forecast. And that is telling us, I think it's telling us what our investments and new borrowing will be. And I can't understand that table at all. So if anyone can help, that would be great. And when I've done a simple cash flow, looking at the budget, where we've been given the figures of new borrowing needed to do the capital expenditure, we've been given those in the budget. When I add those figures through we're about £50 million adrift. So I guess my question is this table consistent with the budget? And why does the public sector forecast cash in such a funny way? Most organisations forecast cash by looking at cash in, cash out. And this sort of comes at it from a curious balance sheet, but it's not a balance sheet. General fund, capital financing requirement and all these things. And then huge figures for less balance sheet resources. I just I can't follow it. So any help there, gratefully received.
Thank you, Chair. I suggest that's a topic to take offline, really, rather than a complex explanation. And you know, tax even me, indeed. Capital financing requirement is a requirement set out in the Prudential Code in terms of something we must report upon. And it's an underlying, not really a need to borrow, but it's an underlying expenditure on assets that, or capital assets basically, that might need financing one way or the other. So it represents the maximum amount you could conceivably borrow without borrowing for a purpose that isn't to finance capital expenditure. If you borrowed more than that, then you'd be borrowing for revenue purposes. So that creates this upper limit that we're supposed to work within. But it doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't represent a target for borrowing. But I'm happy to come back to you with more detail separately, Councillor Sonnet.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm just thinking as well, if I could ask you, Mr. Evans, just to make a note. There are some things like this that come up as we talk about finances that we need to ensure that we incorporate into the training programme that we're talking about putting together in the future for G&A members. So if you could just jot that down, we'll pick that up. Councillor Dundas, did you want to just come back quickly?
Very, very briefly, it was just an observation to pick up actually on that table, and actually it actually applies to a lot of the documents we've looked at this evening, that where we're looking forward beyond next year, a huge number of the figures are contingent on what comes out of the HRA review. So in actual fact, a lot of the stuff we're looking at, unless the HRA review comes back and says everything's going to stay exactly the same, which I think is highly unlikely, actually probably aren't going to quite turn out the way we're saying. I just think it's important that the committee members, we have that in the back of our minds, that will have a huge effect on some of the figures going forward.
Yeah, valid point. Okay, Councillor Kelly.
I'm interested in the table on page 132, which is the PWLB loans table. I understand how the PWLB thing works to a degree, but not in any great detail. This table here, to me, as an effective layperson here, suggests that between 2030 and 2034, the council needs to find, if I'm not mistaken, £10.5 million to repay all those loans. Does that mean we're sort of sitting on a bit of a time bomb here of some description? And obviously, then there's a break at the moment, I see, but then it becomes quite an onslaught for a number of years of having to find quite large sums of money to repay these things. And I'm presuming that it says it's fixed rate interest, and some of the interest rates are low, but some of them are higher. Obviously, there's one that's at 8.8% I saw in there, 8.88%, and that's a long way off. How is it compounding? Is it calculated daily? Is it compounded monthly? Is it compounded annually? Is it a fixed rate on the principal sum that's then added at the end of the term? And therefore, for example, you've got a £1 million at 4.25%. Does that mean that in 2031 that would be 1,045,000 that he's repaying at that point in time? Or is it 0.45%, whatever it's 4.25 compounded annually for the duration of its fixed term bond as it appears to be? And therefore, what is this table here, I can't readily tell, what are we in for? What are we going to be owing over in the relatively near future? Because what we talk about at the moment, it's all quite short term, quite small numbers relatively, but these are quite big numbers, and they're coming quite reasonably soon. And like the reserves that are available at the moment wouldn't deal with this, as far as I can tell. And as far as the other thing I noted was that you can't borrow, or you can't use a PWLB loan to refinance another loan. So you can't go and get cheap lending to pay for cheap lending, because that would be a bit Ponzi anyway, wouldn't it? But so I'm wondering, so it's a two-part question after I've rambled to this point, which is, firstly, how is the interest being calculated and what are we actually in for on each of these line items? And it would be useful to actually see that. And secondly, what is the council's plan, this is more of an open-ended question, I suppose, to deal with these large sums of money that need to be repaid in the relatively near future?
A good question, but there's a good answer, I'm pleased to say. So actually you can borrow to refinance a loan, first of all. So, so it doesn't, it's not a crisis. All these loans are maturing at the same point in time. We provide in the revenue budget for the interest, and interest is paid half yearly in arrears, I think it is. So we provide in the revenue budget, allows for all the interest payments on all of these loans. So that's accommodated. But what we also do as part of our annual budget is make provision for, you might have heard the term minimum revenue provision, MRP. I think it was talked about quite a lot in the council, it has been. This is us putting money away for the principal repayment element, if you like. And we put that away and keep it, and we won't wrap it all up. And at a point in time, when a loan comes due, if there's enough money in that pot, we'll repay that loan using the money that we've saved to set aside by way of MRP. But MRP is a masterclass in itself, really. But it is councils making provision for the repayment of loans, basically. So we are required to do that, and we do. So that all of this will be factored into revenue plans in terms of our ability, so our need to repay, and we're making provision for it. That summarises it. I could talk at some length, I suppose, about it in more detail if required. Probably not tonight.
All right, Councillor Kelly. And local government finance, as you're no doubt learning, is quite a complex beast. And these are the things that we need to ensure are covered in going forward in the training provision that we make available to not only members of the committee, but also all councillors if they want to take them up. Okay, I haven't seen any other indications, and I'm conscious of the time, so we've had the opportunity to note and comment on the updated Q1 Treasury Management Statement. All okay? Yep. Thank you. So that moves us on to item 8.5. Thank you very much, Andrew. And Mark, thanks to you too. Right, welcome Mr. Weavers and Ms. McGrath. Which one of you has the short straw to do the introduction?
Thank you, Chair. That would be me tonight.
I expected that.
I've been tasked with introducing the report for you. So this is a follow-on from the last meeting where we introduced all of the work that we've been doing on the SIP for review of audit committees. And we'd started that work and we presented you with an action plan and a bit of a plan of the work that we wanted to take forwards. So what we've done is reviewed the action plan in light of the comments that you made at the last meeting, and hopefully we've captured those correctly. We've updated the action plan and we've put a revised version into this report. And what I would say is all of this is subject to change. So as we are going through and developing the work programme and the items that we're looking at, all of these things will be revised so we get to the stage where we are comfortable having a list of items that really reflect the true purposes of the Governance and Audit Committee. So as I say, the action plan has been updated and is presented for you. So I'm happy to take any questions on that one or any comments or observations. We've also included for you a report within a report, which is always interesting. So as you're aware, as part of the requirements, we have to produce an annual report on the work undertaken by the committee. That should be a publicly available document and reported through to full council. So Matt has worked quite hard in putting this report together. We've used the SITFA format, and hopefully it presents the work that's been undertaken by the committee and is a true reflection of the work that you undertook during the last financial year. And in that report, there's an appendix that sets out all of the items that were considered and when they were considered. So something of a snapshot for you. That in future, once you're happy with the report, obviously if you're happy with this one, we will go through to full council for the October meeting. Obviously, if you want to make some amendments, then we'll take it through to a later meeting. In future years, this report will come to you earlier on in the year. So you'll get it towards the beginning of the financial year with the review of the previous year. And the last item that's part of the report for you tonight is a template for a skills gap analysis. So as we discussed at the last meeting, part of the work that we have to do and some of the evidence that we have to demonstrate is about the skill set of the committee as a whole. So there's different ways you can do that, but we felt that a skills gap analysis was a good starting point. It's not going to be perfect in terms of getting a huge amount of detail, but this is something where we are going to ask the members of the committee to do a self-assessment of where they think their skills are based on the skills gap analysis. We will collate that information to an anonymised overview of all of those questions about skills to bring a report back to this committee to give a demonstration of where the strengths and weaknesses are in terms of those skill sets, to identify any training needs going forwards. We're trying not to make it just a tick box exercise. However, we need to start somewhere, so this is a good starting point, and hopefully we can build on that going forwards. So it's whether you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just to draw the attention of committee members to what we need to do, because this is not just for noting. We need to approve the revised action plan after we've commented on it and added any further thoughts that we might have. We also need to approve the draft Governance and Audit Committee annual report, which I will be submitting on your behalf, although it's a long time since I had words put into my mouth, but Matt's done an excellent job. And then finally to consider the proposed skills gap analysis template and whether or not we want to tweak that a little bit. So there is a bit of work for us to do on this item. I'll just remind everyone that we've agreed that this is basically a living document because we're evolving this process over the course of this municipal year in the hope of getting it mostly bedded in for next municipal year. The one thing that I picked up on the skills analysis was that I felt it was just a bit accountancy emphasising, and I want to ensure, because I'm not an accountant, that G&A is still appropriate and available to members of all persuasions. Because we don't just look at accountancy on governance and audit. We're also looking at auditing all sorts of things, reassessing most of, if not all of the council's policies, and we take an overview of risk on a regular basis, which is probably where my expertise comes in rather than the accountancy element. Over to you. Questions, comments? Councillor Dundas.
Yeah, very, very briefly, thank you for the document, and I really feel I'd need to ask some questions as you stayed here to this hour to justify it. But just on the skills one, I mean, which I think is a perfectly reasonable document, just key elements, able to focus on material issues and avoid an overall position rather than being sidetracked by detail. Well, we will try that. I don't know if we succeed. I'm just a little bit concerned. It says in the explanation, the Governance and Audit Committee member will need to pitch its review at an appropriate level to avoid spending too much time on detail. I get what you're saying there. I just wouldn't ever want anything in there which discourages the committee or individual members going into the detail, because the devil, as the saying goes, is in the detail. And there's some of the things we've spoken about tonight, particularly around the finances, it has been in a table within a table, which the detail has come out, and we've actually found that perhaps the financial position wasn't quite what the overall might say, actually probably better. So I just am nervous that I wouldn't want anything to discourage members for delving into the detail, because I think that's what we're really here to do. And also support the use of plain English in communications, avoiding jargon, acronyms or something. Well, we can try, can't we, really, you know?
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. I agree with you about detail as well. There are times when we need to be wary of being bogged down in the detail, but there are times when it's essential that we do. And I think by focusing on some of the detail a couple of years ago, we managed to highlight the issues around CCHL that needed addressing and have been subsequently addressed. Councillor Kelly, did I see you? No? Councillor Sunnox?
One tiny point. It says in your report that we've considered member conduct. Have we actually done that? I don't think we've had, or there haven't, perhaps we would consider member conduct if there'd been any issues. But I don't think we can say we've
considered the code of conduct.
Yeah, so we do an annual review of the code of conduct as part of the monitoring officer report. I think it's probably coming to you in November, but it comes around about that time every year, and it's your opportunity to go through all of our ethical governance procedures and our conduct issues and any concerns that you might have.
Okay, so it's the procedure we've reviewed. And then I've got a more sort of general point that I'm going to find very, very hard to explain. And you're going to think that I'm some type of bandit for suggesting it, but the emphasis is so much on us understanding procedures and council protocols. And I feel that to do our job, we need to understand the nuts and bolts of this business in a common sense way. We need to talk about cash in and cash out, and that there's layer after layer of sophisticated organisational speak that goes on top of that, and that our training is that our eyes are attending to that rather than getting to the basics. And so I don't know how to express that. I don't know how to change what you've done, Hayley, but it doesn't feel quite right. We need to have people here who go right through all the organisational claptrap and get to the basics. Are we communicating it? Are we, we've missed a huge risk. We've missed a massive, great risk. And we should be asking ourselves why. And we get off, and whenever you start getting near one of these points, it's diverted off. It's all going to be considered another meeting, or it's going to come back later. You have to read the reports. You have to read between the lines of the reports to try and understand what's going on. So I think we need a culture which is much more down to earth. And funny enough, for an accountant to say less accountancy, it's a bit of a change of attitude that we need if we're going to really get at those risks and understand what we're doing.
Thank you. And I think you're probably pushing an open door with most, if not all, of your colleagues around the table when I say, I balk at acronyms, as Hayley will know, and I think it's essential that anything that we publish is in as plain an English as it can be, because it's not just for us sitting around the table, and we have the opportunity to query and to ask for clarification, but it's also for the residents of Colchester to see what's going on in their city council on a regular basis. So, yeah, I take your point. I think it's a very valid one, William. I'll come back to you then, Hayley.
Yeah, I think in terms of the point that you're making, Councillor Sunnox, you're absolutely right. We need to develop those processes, and this is part of what we're looking at, is how we change the mindset of the committee as we go forwards. And I think it's fair to say that this whole process, we've only just started it, but we're already seeing a change in some of that challenge that's coming through from all members of the committee. And I think as we go through, it's for the committee as well to refine with officers what you want to look at and how you look at it. And we can pull that in to the process that we're looking at. We want to make it as simple and as straightforward as possible. And it's getting that balance between going too much into a detail and concentrating on a particular area, balanced with actually getting to the, as you say, the nuts and the bolts of the issues that you need to review. So we will take that point going forwards.
Thank you. And as I started by saying, this is an evolving process, isn't it? Something that we're all, officers and members, are going to be learning through. So I know when I looked at the skills set, I thought, oh, there's a lot of detail in there. But maybe if we go through that detail, the first iteration, we work out from that, yeah, we don't really need that bit. We don't really need that. We can cut that down, and all we need is A, B, C, and D rather than E, F, G, and H as well. But I think it's a process that we're going to have to go through and learn from before we can decide what ultimately we want to be the final iteration. Mr. Weavers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I thought it would be worth saying that I think that it would be important for the committee to meet in private, to have a conversation around the results of the skills analysis rather than just doing it in a public meeting to start with. Obviously, it needs to go into a formal meeting eventually, but we need to have, I think, a private meeting to enable you to have an open and frank conversation about that. And I think I just would point out that the template is the SIP for template from the position statement guidance. The language in that is exactly what's in there. We haven't changed that. So I think it's important that we do retain that language at this point, because that's what we're going to be assessed against eventually. So as you rightly say, it's part of a journey where we're starting to make some improvements. I mean, the private meetings with the auditors, that's a big step for this committee and something that you've been wanting for a while. So I think that's a sign of progress and positivity for the committee going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, and I thought we'd agreed at the first meeting when we discussed this that the skills audit we would do in camera, because I think it's likely to be much more open and honest than if we do something in a public session where some members, if not all members, might be a bit more guarded. Okay. Anything else? I'm just looking around the table. No? Okay. So, one, do we approve the revised action plan? All in favour? Agreed? Okay. The draft annual report to full council, all in agreement? Okay. And we've considered the proposed skills gap analysis template, and we'll have to work out when we're going to do that and how we're going to do that. Great. Thank you both very much for your contributions this evening and throughout, because I know there's a lot of work gone into this before tonight's meeting. So thank you both. That takes us on to item 9 then, and the work programme. Mr. Evans.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points to this standard report. The committee will note that at the moment the agenda for the meeting, which has been scheduled for 3rd of December, hasn't been determined, and there's some discussion around which items are more appropriate to move into that, which will continue if that's okay, and obviously it will come back to the committee for the next meeting for formal ratification. And then note we've got a couple of other meetings to sort out now with various accountants, so that will be again built into this as well. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have to squeeze a fair bit more into our work programme over the remaining, 8 months of the municipal year. Okay, any comments on the work programme other than that? No? Right, all in favour? Thank you. And there's just one other item, and that's the confidential minutes from the closed session of the last meeting. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to have a look at those. Can I take those as read? Do we need to go into a confidential session, or are you all happy with those as they are? Okay, fine. Well then, in that case, it's too late. You've had your bite of the cherry. Those who were here and have read them, do you accept those as an accurate record? Yeah. Okay. Whoops. Thank you very much. Okay. In that case, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you one and all for your participation this evening. Good night.